Exciting week because we have been able to begin in this reopening phase, some community groups now gathering in the evening, last night, Tuesday night, and then tonight, Wednesday night, getting together and slowly dipping our feet in the water, so to speak, as the possibilities arise for regathering. One, I miss you, I love being with you, and I'm anticipating that day when it comes when we can all be back together again. And again, we'll just take full advantage of those possibilities as they become available to us in the weeks and months to come. Hey, I'm joined here by Ahmaud Hall. Ahmaud is an elder here at Salem Alliance, and undoubtedly you have been watching the news, reading the news, and hearing about what's happening in our nation. And a little over a week ago, George Floyd lost his life at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer, and it has sparked a response, a significant response in our country. And I've asked Ahmaud to join us because, Ahmaud, I think it'd be really important for us as a church to hear, what's the African-American community feeling right now?
So thank you, Steve. Thank you, congregation, just for your love and support, and for those of you who've reached out, Tamir, to others of your friends and family. I can't speak for everyone, but I would say that the tenor or the consistency of relationship within the African-American community, generally speaking, and America has been one of almost like a bad relationship, one of abuse, one of pain, one of neglect, and as we continue to see our brothers and our sisters murdered and killed, some in their homes, some in the streets, it's heartbreaking, and it's consistently heartbreaking. And so the posture and response of what's happening locally, nationally, is a response to that heartbreak and is a response to that pain.
Yeah, and growing up, you grew up around Philly, East Coast. My guess is, because you and I've had some conversation about this, that you've experienced this personally. What was that like for you? I mean, tell us some stories if you feel free to.
And so for me, growing up in just outside of West Philadelphia in Upper Darby, it's been a beautiful neighborhood, beautiful community. The community that I grew up in was mostly African American, and so that in itself comes with its own just realities of a beautiful culture and people coming together. In that it was also more of a rougher neighborhood, and so one example or story that I had of when I was a kid was my cell phone got stolen out of my locker. And I remember that my dad told me to make a report to the school if that ever happened. And so I was walking home, and then as I got home, I was like, oh my goodness, I forgot to make a report. And so I am running back to my middle school, so I'm in 7th or 8th grade, probably 12 or 13 years old, running back to school, and I hear sirens in the area, so there's probably some kind of fight or altercation that happened between people. And as I run past this one street, heading back to my school, I see a cop up the block. And as I slow down and try to seem like there's no issue, the cop pulls me over and sits me down, and he's like, what are you doing? Why are you running? I tell him the story of my dad, telling me to head back to school. And he's like, don't lie to me. If you lie to me, I'm gonna put you in the back of this car. And so that's one example out of others, both in Philadelphia and also here, of engagements with the police.
Yeah, so talk to me about that, because obviously Salem's not Philly, and you've been out here for several years now. And so what does it feel like? What's it look like for you as a person of color in Salem, and how do you feel this racial inequity right here in our own city?
Yeah, I think that the racism exists all across the U.S. And so from the border of Mexico to the border of Canada, and Alaska and Hawaii are included as well. And so in that, I think that there's no place where there isn't racial inequality or racial inequity here in the United States. I would say here in Salem, it looks a lot like microaggressions. And so microaggressions are the little things that people do or don't do that overtly treat other folks differently than how they would treat someone else. And so for me, walking down the street and having folks look down or having folks cross to the other side, I know some of you all have probably experienced that in this COVID season as people keep social distancing, but I'll say for myself and for many of my brothers and sisters, that's a daily reality here in the Salem-Kaiser community. And so, yeah.
Yeah, when you and I were talking about this and that term microaggression, we started fleshing that out a little bit. It's like, yeah, sometimes it's the responses that are just natural, seem very natural to us, that communicate something other than love and acceptance.
Exactly. It communicates a fear and otherness, an unwelcomeness, like you're not welcomed around me and you don't belong either in my space or in my community.
Yeah. And church, I would just say that in this conversation, and both Ahmaud and I have talked about this, it's a conversation that needs to continue. And so we're talking about what that might look like for us. But when it comes to what's going on in our country, I think we have to understand that biblically speaking, justice is it's a headline in Scripture. If you read Old Testament and New Testament, you read Micah 6:8, what does the Lord require of you? Do justly, walk humbly, and express mercy. It's something God confronts his people on, as Isaiah 58. And justice is it's a biblical concept that God has a very strong heart for. And it's something that's expressed for all peoples. And as we look at being a people who do justice and live justly, I know you've given some thought to what are some practical ways that we as a church can live that out?
So yeah, Steve, I think that the first thing that comes to mind, I love the incarnation. And so for me, sitting in the incarnation and modeling the realities of Jesus, of God coming down and fleshing God's self in Jesus here on earth. And as I think about that, I think of the first posture of humility. And so God relinquishing the power, the privilege of heaven and coming down on earth as Jesus, and relinquishing the comforts of heaven and just having time here on earth with us. And so I think of having a humble posture of learning, of relinquishing privilege, of relinquishing power, of relinquishing the ability to not know. And so privilege being like, you don't have to engage in something if you have the privilege to have it not be your reality. And so Jesus left the privilege of heaven in order to have a fleshly, a human reality here on earth. And so being humble in that way and relinquishing the powers that one has for the sake of the vulnerable. In the incarnation, we also see the vulnerability. And so Jesus didn't come down to earth the same way that Jesus left. Jesus came down as a baby. And a baby is literally like the most vulnerable being on the planet. A baby can't live or sustain itself without a parent for multiple months up to years after it's born. And I think that as Jesus, God, came down humbly, I think that, or in vulnerability, in humility and vulnerability, that we as a people must also be vulnerable with ourselves and also with other people. And then in that, we also see Jesus being proximate. The incarnation shows proximity. And so not being far away or distant from people who are in pain, but God coming in the embodiment of Jesus and being close to us in our sinfulness and our struggles and our vices. And in that, and in the proximity of us and Jesus is where the healing happens. And so, And so as we as a people seek to model that personally, but also communally, I think being humble in the sense of, humble in the sense of lowering oneself and seeking to learn. So reading books, watching movies, articles, music, soaking in the need to learn. I think being vulnerable with ourselves and what makes us uncomfortable, and communicating that, and seeking to continually grow. But then also, I think being proximate, and so being close to brothers and sisters who are experiencing pain.
Yeah, that'll preach. It's because it's so, I think there's something within us that wants I'll speak for myself, whatever the topic, when we see that maybe we're part of a problem, we get defensive. So humility is such a beautiful picture of the incarnation. The vulnerability piece, when we get defensive, it's because we're trying to protect ourselves. And sometimes we're protecting things that feel very normal to us that aren't normally experienced by others. And the proximity piece is we like to be around people who are like us. So I just think Ahmaud is giving great practical, wise advice about, okay, so how do we kind of put our radar up a bit and move forward in these days and practically be part of a healing solution? So I love those words, Ahmaud, and connecting it to the incarnation.
Jesus did it first.
Yeah, it's his, following his example. Yeah. As we wrap up our midweek update, I know we've got a little bit longer. Thanks for sticking with us. But as we do, we have this conversation, we talk about ideas. We talk about concepts. Sometimes in the idea sharing and the concepts, we miss the people that are part of what we're talking about. People who have lost their lives unarmed, and their lives have been taken from them. As we wrap up, you're going to see names on the screen one at a time, a name, an age, location where they lived. These are all people of color, Latin and African American, who have had their lives taken from them. And I want to encourage you to just watch each name, and would you read each name out loud? And just let it sink in. We're talking about people. You're seeing names of people who had siblings, and who have mothers and fathers, who have grandparents, who have friends, people like you and I who are no longer with us. Would you just allow these names to then come before you and allow you to enter into the grief that Amani was talking about that our community is experiencing? Thanks for being with us this week.